Welcome to another episode of Pick 3 DST, where I give you 3 defenses I like, 1 defense I'm fading, and 1 defense I'm stashing ahead of Week 3 of the NFL season. As a reminder, these are not my full weekly DST rankings. If you want to check those out, you can click the link below, which will take you to my rankings, which I'll update as the week goes on. We get weather concerns and injury reports and things of that nature. As always, we're going to start with our accountability check, and what was a pretty good Week 2 for our video picks. My solid defense of the week was the Ravens. They finished as the number 2 defense on the week with 15 fantasy points. My stud defense of the week was the Rams. They had 8 fantasy points. And then I faded the Eagles in that matchup with the Chiefs, saying that I thought the Eagles would score about 5 fantasy points. And they scored 5 fantasy points against the Chiefs. Unfortunately, my sleeper defense was the Dallas Cowboys, and they looked atrocious defensively in that game against the Giants, putting up just 1 fantasy point. So that was a big miss and a reminder that early in the season, some teams may flash in the first week or two and then come crashing back down to earth. So we don't want to change our expectations too much based off just 1 week, and we'll hope we'll avoid some of those poor picks here in Week 3. My sleeper defense of the week is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Consensus has them down at 21st, but I have them up at 5th on the week. Now, I know it's surprising that I have the Jaguars this high. It surprised me too. However, the stats back it up, and they're going to face a Houston Texans offense that looked really bad on Monday night against a pretty average to slightly above average Bucs defense. The Jaguars have played pretty good defense the first 2 weeks, and they were actually looking good against the Bengals even before Joe Burrow's injury. So this is not just about Jake Browning ending that game with the Bengals. On the season, the Jaguars are first in turnover rate, 5th in EPA allowed, that's expected points added allowed on defense, 8th in opponent scoring rate, and they're facing a Texans offense that gives up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing defenses and has one of the worst offensive lines in football. Nick Chubb does not look as explosive as he was previously, and I know the Texans have some exciting young pass catchers in this offense, but CJ Stroud did not look good on Monday, and so I'm more than happy to roll out the Jaguars this week. My solid defense of the week is the Atlanta Falcons. Consensus has them at 9th, and I have them up at 3rd on the week. This Falcons defense underwent an overhaul in the offseason, signing Leonard Floyd, using 4 of their first 5 draft picks on defensive players, and that was after previous drafts where they also loaded up on defensive talent, and we're starting to see that pay dividends right now through the first 2 weeks of the season against some pretty solid Tampa Bay Bucks and Minnesota Vikings offenses. The Falcons rank 3rd in EPA allowed per play, 3rd in PFF's pass rush productivity rate, 3rd in opponent scoring rate, and 6th in turnover rate. They're also going up against the Panthers offense that doesn't really look good. They have no real reliable pass catchers outside of rookie Tet McMillan. Bryce Young has really taken a step back since the end of last season when we thought he might be putting the pieces together. And perhaps more importantly, the Panthers placed 2 of their starting offensive linemen on the IR this week, which means Bryce Young is going to be behind a makeshift offensive line that will be starting at least 2 backups. I really like that against this Falcons defense, and so I think the Falcons are a really strong top 5 play in fantasy leagues this week. Before we get to my stud defense, pause this video and comment below. Let me know which defense you're starting this week, or ask me any start-sit questions, and I'll get to those as the week goes on. My stud defense of the week is the Seattle Seahawks. Consensus has them at 10th, but they are my top-ranked defense on the week. Now, I know the Saints only give up the 16th most fantasy points to opposing defenses, and we targeted the Saints last week with the 49ers in a lot of formats, and we didn't get a huge score. However, I think things are going to be a little bit different this week. First of all, I think the Seattle Seahawks offense is more potent than the 49ers offense we saw last week with Mac Jones at quarterback, and so I think the 49ers or the Seahawks are going to put up far more points and put the Saints into comeback mode. I also think this Seahawks secondary with guys like Reek Woolen and Julian Love and Devon Witherspoon are not going to let Spencer Rattler throw for 3 touchdowns like the 49ers secondary did last week. So I expect the Seahawks to capitalize on a positive game script for them. The Seahawks defense right now ranks 4th in turnover rate and 6th in opponent scoring rate. They have given up some big plays, but they've played some solid offenses, like a healthy 49ers offense in week number 1, and then a Steelers offense that I think both are better than the Saints. And so I'm happy to roll with the Seahawks this week as one of my top defenses. The defense I'm fading this week is the Tampa Bay Bucks. Consensus has them up at 5th, and I have them at 16th on the week. The logic for me fading the Bucs is the same logic I had last week fading the Eagles. I think the Bucs are a fine play. I think they're a safe floor play, but I don't really think they're a high upside play that the rankings suggest that they are. And I know a lot of the reason they're ranked this high, much like the Eagles last week, is because of injury. It looks like Justin Fields is going to miss this week with a concussion, but I really don't think Tyrod Taylor is much of a downgrade to Justin Fields. In fact, if we're picking against the Jets with the fantasy defense, I think Taylor is actually a worse opponent because Tyrod Taylor doesn't take as many chances as Justin Fields. He's not going to make as many mistakes. He's not going to take as many bad sacks. And so, no, the Jets may not be an explosive offense, but they weren't an explosive offense to begin with. I don't know that they're really going to turn the ball over a lot. Tyrod Taylor will be able to move the ball down the field with guys like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. So I don't think this really upgrades the Bucs defense that much. The Bucs rank 11th in pass rush productivity rate, but they have yet to turn a ball over or to force a turnover this year, and they rank 20th in EPA allowed, so I don't really think this is a smash spot that the rankings would suggest it is. Lastly, my stash to get ahead of Week 4 is the New England Patriots, who are rostered in 41% of leagues right now. As of now, it seems like the offenses that we're going to want to pick on with fantasy defenses are the Dolphins, Panthers, Titans, Raiders, Saints, Giants, and Browns. I can't recommend you play the Jets defense or the Bears defense, so that takes out 2 of those options for Week 4. And then the Texans, Bills, and Lions are rostered in over 70% of leagues, so they're not an option. That leaves the Patriots, who have a really good matchup against the Panthers. The Pats defense looks a little bit more rejuvenated again under Mike Vrabel. However, they also have a good matchup against the Steelers this week, so the Patriots might push up over 50% roster rate, which means I think another option to stash is the Chargers, who are just 7% rostered, and get the Giants in week number 4. That's going to do it for this episode of Pick 3 DST. As a reminder, you can click the link below to get my full rankings, which I'll update as the week goes on. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get all of our football content and fantasy football content over at NBC Sports. And I'll see you next week on another episode of Pick 3 DST. Good luck on Sunday.